Well, here we are. It's Australian Open Draw Show. The Happy Slam is how people refer to this one. Some of my most fond memories of doing coffee break tennis come from around this time of year. And as you know, if you've been following us for a while, I'm always very good about doing lots and lots of videos during the Australian Open. It's between this and Wimbledon. It's probably my favorite time to do the show and cover tennis. But today, it is not quite as happy as usual. It definitely, I got to tell you, I feel pretty bad about what's going on in Australia. And as you see, this draw show, normally draw show is front and center and all over, but now draw show is kind of an afterthought this time around as we get ready for our Happy Slam to kick off the 2022 tennis season. And of course, that's because of the big news that is overshadowing the Australian Open draw, the elephant in the room. And of course, that is, put it on the screen, Kei Nishikori has withdrawn from the Australian Open due to injury. No, of course not. That is a joke. Of course, the news is that Novak Djokovic, as this meme, my friend who doesn't care about tennis very much, goes to show you how big of a story this has become. A friend of mine who knows nothing about tennis sent me this. Set Djokovic free just to arrest him, throw him in the slammer all over again. That is the story. And I got to say, this is less of a happy slam because it's kind of shocking, and I feel pretty bad for what Djokovic is going through. I think even Andy Murray, who absolutely loves the vaccine, right? He probably likes mandating. He probably likes vaccine mandates and requirements, right? Andy Murray, the press have tried to get him to throw Djokovic under the bus. He won't do it. Nadal even won't do it. These guys have so much respect for their fellow Big Four, if you count Murray, and their Big Four competitor. And I feel pretty bad. I'm sure they feel bad for him. I mean, just ask yourself, even if you hate Djokovic and you think he deserves this, what if for any reason, think of something else that Nadal wanted to take a stand against, and the French government ultimately kicked him out of the French Open, because there is a chance we might never see Djokovic play the Australian Open ever again. That's a real thing, right? That's out there in the ether. We've heard that before. If he's banned for 3 years, we don't know yet for sure, but we will today go through all of the latest, what's happening. How is the Djokovic team? Of course, he's fighting this, right? Djokovic, the ultimate competitor. He is not going to go down without a fight. It's pretty weaselly, slimy, lack of spine, you could say, from the Australian government, the way they've, in particular, Mr. Hockey, the way they waited last minute, right? We're 48 hours since they were supposed to announce whether they're going to cancel his visa a second time or not. They waited till the last minute, right before the tournament is about to begin. We're less than 48 hours away from the tournament starting. So it would make it really hard for Djokovic to fight this, but he's still going to fight it. He has not been detained yet. Like I said, we'll go through all the latest if you're just waking up and hearing this. But Djokovic will be detained, not in the same place. We'll go through the details of that in the show today, but he will be detained starting tomorrow morning, my time. And we'll see how this shakes out. He's basically got 1 day to fight this, and then he'll go straight from the slammer to the Australian Open. I mean, this is pretty crazy. So like I said, we'll go through all the news today. And then, we'll talk about why is the Australian government doing this. There's plenty of speculation in there from around the media. And then we'll talk about, or before that, we'll talk about the latest. And then after that, we're going to ask ourselves, how much how much blame does Djokovic deserve for the predicament he's in? Is he making a righteous, honorable stand here against it? And I think, whether you agree with him or not, it would have been a lot easier to take the vaccine. A lot of people have been saying it would have been so easy to take the vaccine, but not when you don't believe in it and you're making a principled stand against it. Whether you agree with him or not, you have to admire that Djokovic is doing something that not a lot of people would do. As Steph Tsitsipas put, it's kind of a mixed message from Tsitsipas, who originally, if we'll remember, didn't want to get vaccinated. And then he ultimately did it to get in. A lot of tennis players who didn't want to do it did it to get in. And Tsitsipas said, basically it takes a lot of balls, a lot of tennis balls, that is, to do what Djokovic is doing, whether you agree with him or not. But how much of the blame does he deserve? How much fault is here? What could he have done differently? We'll talk about all that in today's exciting emergency news, breaking news broadcast edition of Coffee Break Tennis. Breaking news, breaking news. We interrupt the previously recorded video with some audio breaking news from the Daily Mail. Put it on the screen. Bombshell twist in Novak Djokovic saga. As it is revealed, his visa was canceled over anti-vax sentiment fears at the Australian Open, as the tennis star is set to be locked up again. In today's show, as you know, we talk about all the latest news, but this one came out very recently, and I wanted to slip this in while I was editing today's video. World number one, here's some highlights, bullet points from the Daily Mail. The world number one tennis star fights deportation order in the Federal Circuit Court. We will detail how that's going to go later in the show. Again, he is going to a different judge because he's now moving to federal court. I don't know the Australian court system well enough to know if that's going to help or hurt, but I would say hurt because they're leaving the courtroom of the judge who was at least friendly enough to the Djokovic case to overturn previously before this latest move by the Australian government. I don't know. I guess it would be bad news because he's leaving that judge and going to a federal judge. The lawyers, now this is from Djokovic's lawyers, but still, if this is true, if this is really the real reason why the Australian government is doing this, it looks pretty bad to me. Let's read it. Novak Djokovic's lawyers have told a late-night court hearing his visa is being canceled on the grounds he could excite.
Could you say that again?
Oh, thank you, Siri. Let's take the Apple Watch off. This is serious business. Let's read this. Novak Djokovic's lawyers have told a late-night court hearing his visa is being canceled on grounds he could excite anti-vax sentiment at the Australian Open on Monday. The tennis star's legal team argued that Immigration Minister Alex Hawke's reasoning was patently irrational and failed to consider how deporting the world number one might have the opposite effect by whipping up more support for the anti-vaccination movement. Djokovic, who is not vaccinated against COVID-19, has not yet been detained, but will have to attend an 8 a.m. interview on Saturday with immigration officials, and then it is likely he'll be sent to an immigration hotel. Like I said, the video I'm editing for you right now covers all of that in great detail. Despite the late-night proceedings, legal experts say it's going to be very difficult, if not impossible, for Djokovic to successfully challenge a visa cancellation decision made personally by executive fiat by Minister Hawke. Djokovic's lawyer told the Federal Circuit and Family Court on Friday night that government officials' fears were unfounded and that it would be wrong to remove a man of good standing from Australia and impair his career. Minister Hawke used his discretionary powers to cancel the Serbian's visa on Friday, 4 days after the federal government had backed down on sending him home. Officials said Djokovic may pose a risk to the community, and his visa cancellation was in the public interest. Shortly after this announcement, Prime Minister Scott Morrison released a statement saying, Aussies have made many sacrifices during this pandemic, and they rightly expect the result of those sacrifices to be protected. This is what the minister is doing in taking this action today. The cancellation means Djokovic could be barred from a new Australian visa for 3 years, except under certain special circumstances. Who knows? Who knows if that means Djokovic will ever play the Australian Open again? This is this is quite a twist. Sounds like even if Djokovic said he was sorry and got vaccinated, maybe they'd make an exception for him, but we might not see Djokovic play the Australian Open ever again. And even if he didn't play it for the next 3 years, that would mean it'd be at least 3 years away until he could play it, maybe 4 years, depending on when it started and stopped. And do you think Djokovic could win the Australian Open 3+ years from today? No guarantees in tennis, as we know. Things can change fast, even when you're one of the greatest tennis players of all time. Wow. So there you go. If that is true, that they're literally doing this because they worry that Australians will be less likely to want to get vaccinated, which we know that adults over the age 18 and above we have over a 92% vaccination rate in Australia currently. So I really don't understand it, and this is pretty shocking stuff to hear that is their reason. And then the other claim that he's a threat to public health. I don't know how he's a threat to public health when it's pretty obvious that everyone is getting Omicron. They just had over 1 million cases in one single day in Australia. well over 100,000 in one day. And in the last couple weeks, I think the number is at about 1 million now. So looks pretty silly from the Australian government. Anyways, I'll let you get back to the previous programming where we cover a lot of this stuff in great detail. Welcome to Coffee Break Tennis. Today on the show, we go through, I just basically told you, so we'll jump right into it, but I'll recap really quick. We'll go through the latest news, how Djokovic is planning to fight this thing, why this is happening, why the Australian government is doing what they're doing, and of course, ultimately, I've got some comments in here from the Coffee Break Tennis Instagram page. You can follow us on Instagram, Coffee Break Tennis. You can follow us on Twitter at Coffee Break Tens, T-E-N-S, like the number 10. And of course, if you love Coffee Break Tennis and you want to join the team and help us keep going and growing, you can go to patreon.com/Coffee Break Tennis. They are the real heroes, the patron saints, angels among us, truly. We'll look at some comments and talk about, how much blame does Djokovic deserve for all this and how will this be remembered? As you can tell, if you watched my last video, I'm pretty sympathetic to Djokovic's side of things. But of course, he hasn't been perfect here, so we'll look at all that. Let's kick it off with The Express. Believe it or not, The Express did a great job of all the media outlets I scanned this morning to get the best way to just cover what's going on right away. They did a great job, but they were a little misleading with their headline, as per usual, at the London, UK Express. You can't ask me, headline from The Express. Novak Djokovic judge loses patience with defense request. So Djokovic's lawyers have already been before the judge since the news broke. And of course, they have the big showdown, Djokovic versus the Australian government case that will decide if he is deported. The Australian government has agreed to not deport Djokovic until after his Sunday hearing. Of course, the tournament starts here in the U.S. basically late Sunday night. In Australia, 16 hours ahead of us Monday. So if Djokovic were to win this, let's just put this out there. He's going to be detained tomorrow in Australia, or basically tonight here, and he's going to have like 14 hours between being released from his prison or his detention center, whatever they're going to call it, to get on the court and start his title defense. For some odd reason, comment below how this one rubs you, whether you agree with Djokovic or not. I don't know why, but the Australian Open is having his end of the draw. Oh yeah, by the way, we'll talk about the draw a little tiny bit today. The top half of the draw is going to get rolling on Monday. So Djokovic would go from detention if he wins, or he's going to go back to Serbia or wherever he's going to fly to. He's going to go from detention to the court with not much time in between. This is the craziest thing I've seen in tennis since I started watching, and I've been watching for about 18 years now. All right, so Yasmin Saeed wrote this. The judge presiding over Novak Djokovic's directions hearing adjourned the court for 5 minutes after appearing to grow irritated with a request from the defense. Now, the headline would lead you to believe that the judge, Djokovic and his team basically said, hey, you let us stay. Why can't you do something to stop the Australian government? From overruling your don't eat breakfast right before you do a show, Matt. You become belchy. Why can't you stop the government from overthrowing your previous ruling? And he says, you can't ask me to do that. That's above my pay grade, mate. No, that's not really the story here, but the headline kind of misleads that way. The judge presiding over Novak Djokovic's directions, blah, blah, blah. He stopped things for a few minutes. The world number one had his visa canceled by Immigration Minister Alex Hawke on Friday, but his lawyers are preparing to formally file an appeal after the directions hearing. This is the thing we're about to talk about, which is basically just getting the rules, the battle guidelines set up here before they really do the big show in court on Sunday. After directions hearing held to determine the next steps of the case, blah, blah, blah. So Stephen Lloyd, representing Minister Alex Hawke, he's the solicitor, lawyer for the Australian government here. He agreed to the timetable laid out by the defense of Novak Djokovic, expecting to have their final submissions filed by 12 p.m. Saturday and suggesting that the immigration minister has by 10 p.m. Mr. Lloyd also confirmed that the world number one would not be deported until proceedings were completed on Sunday. Djokovic will be detained on Saturday following an interview at the immigration offices at 8 a.m. local time. He'll spend a period of 10 a.m. to 2 p.m. somewhere in there at his lawyer's offices, where he is classed as being detained if border force officials are present on the same floor as the building. So not going to jail, actually. He will be detained, but this is not what they're going to do, so we don't know what they're going to do, actually. They're probably going to take him to a house somewhere. Basically saying Djokovic doesn't have to go back to the horrible refugee hotel prison if he can just go hang out in the lawyer's offices while there are armed guards there, making sure he doesn't run away or something like that. Still under lock and key, basically. Spend the evening in a detention hotel, so he will go to a detention hotel after that before being taken back to his lawyer's offices for hearing on Sunday. Nick Wood, part of the World Number One's defense, raised what he said was a legitimate concern that there would be a media frenzy. Yeah, after we saw people climbing on the car that Djokovic might have been in, they weren't sure. Serbians, basically protesting, and then the police coming in and pepper spraying them. The lawyer for Djokovic is saying, can we not do this again and move Djokovic to be detained Saturday night while he waits to do his legal battle on Sunday? Can we move him somewhere else where people don't know so there's not, 1,000 people out there going crazy, starting like a riot? But as it was nearing 11 p.m. local time on Friday night, the judge sounded a bit tetchy, grumpy here in the U.S., they would say, as he asked Mr. Wood whether he had considered, quote, on mature reflection, the obviousness of the circus that might have occurred to everyone else before 10:55 p.m. on Friday. So yeah, basically that's his Aussie way of saying no duh or no shiza Sherlock. You can't ask me to broker this, said the judge. He told Djokovic's defense before leaving the courtroom. After more than 10 minutes, the hearing resumed as the Serbs' lawyers confirmed they had agreed to a location private for his client to be detained. Meanwhile, it was announced that the top half of the draw will be kicking it off on Monday. That means Djokovic has very little time to get ready before the tournament gets rolling. By the way, I have a very important meeting, not with a judge, but we got to rush through today's show. We'll look at the draw a lot more as things get rolling. As you know, we like to look through the draw pretty much through the entire tournament of a major. This is from Insider.com. The Australian government is being accused of using Novak Djokovic's shambles to distract from the country's other problems. This is very political. There's a rule of politics. Politicians, number one purpose, right? The number one thing they do is appear like they are doing something about the problems. So they're trying to look like they're taking on the real problem here in Novak Djokovic. But Australia, they just recently reported in one day 130,000 new COVID cases in a country where over 92% of the people are vaccinated. Obviously, this whole thing with Omicron looks very silly when you're saying Djokovic can't come in because if your case is that he's a public health threat, it's pretty silly looking when everyone else who's vaccinated it's still happening, right? It's still spreading. We're having breakthroughs all over the place because of this new variant, Omicron, which of course has been quoted, watch the last video we did, all over the place by all kinds of scientists and epidemiologists, and even politicians now here in the U.S. are coming out and admitting that there are breakthroughs and that this is much more mild. I think the latest thing I've seen is that, and I think this is if you're unvaccinated, I'm not sure though, so don't quote me on that, but either way, 91% less deadly the Omicron is compared to the Delta variant, which of course was about, I can't remember exactly, I want to say twice as deadly as the original variant. Either way, definitely more deadly the Delta variant was. Okay, so Djokovic had his visa revoked for a second time on Friday, blah, blah, blah. We know that. After just 4 days being held in immigration detention facility, Djokovic released, visas reinstated, blah, blah, blah. You know the timeline of what's happened. The lengthy saga has led some in Australian politics suggests the government is trying to distract from other issues in the country. According to The Guardian, at a press conference on Friday, Labour's shadow treasurer, Jim Chalmers, accused the current government of using this Djokovic saga as a distraction from the shortages in our supermarkets. Oh, they're having that there too? Having a little bit of that here. Shortages in our chemists and the shortages in our workers. Friday, Australia reported over 130,000 new cases of COVID, largely due to surge in Omicron infections. This was at its highest ever single-day case number. Yeah, wow. Rising cases are driving up hospitalization rates, although it's been reported here in the U.S. that a majority of these people are going to the hospital for other reasons, and then they test everyone who comes into the hospital. I know because I was there last year, and they tested me like 3 times in 2 days. And then these people are surprised to find out, oh, I had COVID? I don't even have any symptoms, a lot of them. So it goes to show you, Omicron, pretty mild for most people. driving up hospitalization rates and putting severe strain on several countries' industries. But why are the industries under strain, including food distribution and transport, according to Reuters? Of course, that would be because a lot of these people are required to stay home, even if they have very mild symptoms, which is, as we talked about in the last video, not the greatest policy considering what we're dealing with here in Omicron. Maybe it's about time to stop this debacle, finish it once and for all, said Tasmanian Senator Jackie Lambie, calling the government's handling of this situation an absolute shambles. Make up your mind, Alex Hawke. Where are you? Missing in action. Make a decision. Well, he made his decision, as we know. If you can't make a decision on Novak Djokovic, goodness me, how are you guys running the country? This is an absolute shambles, and we are running out of precious time. Now we go to the Politico. Even more evidence of how political this has become in Australia. It really did come down to another reason why this took so long, not just to make it really hard for Djokovic to appeal, but also to make sure that they could pull it and focus group it and study what they thought the average Australian would think about this, because there is an election coming up for the Australian government in just a few months. Let's take a listen to this from the Politico. Why Australia is paralyzed over deporting Djokovic. The Morrison government's strategy to win elections, it has a name. The pub test. Think Britain's man on the Clapham omnibus. No idea what that means. But 3 beers in and constantly being polled about what he thinks of the prime minister. Right? So that's their strategy for winning the election. Do what you think the average person drinking beer in a pub would be the right thing to do. Okay. With the federal election just months away, Morrison's center-right Liberal Party is hyper alert for anything that could upset the average Aussie. The rules for traveling to Australia right now are clear. You must have a visa, a recent negative COVID test, be fully vaccinated, and truthfully fill in your travel declaration. Djokovic is unvaccinated, and his form incorrectly stated he hadn't traveled in the 14 days prior to his arrival in Australia. While Djokovic was holed up in a hotel detention, contesting the cancellation of his visa, the Aussie PM and his colleagues were all too eager to highlight his failures. Rules are rules, and there are no special cases, said Mr. Morrison. He proclaimed this in a press conference on January 6th. The job of Australia's border force is to apply the rules to everyone. The Morrison government will always back them to do that, mate. Home Affairs Minister Karen, told you one of them was called Minister Karen. I don't know if she's related to Dan Andrews, dictator Dan, our old buddy, who's been oddly quiet. I think in Melbourne there is a lot of Serbians living there, and maybe that's why we haven't heard as much out of Dan Andrews as we normally do. Karen Andrews added, Minister Karen, last week, the only way we can assure a fair go for all, especially those Australians and their families who have made sacrifices over the past 2 years in order to abide by various pandemic rules. But the verdict from Federal Circuit Court Judge Anthony Kelly turned the situation into a headache for the government. While Kelly ordered Djokovic to be released, he did so on administrative grounds, not because the tennis camp's visa was valid, but because the government was forced to concede he hadn't been given enough time to respond to its cancellation. At that point, Morrison and co. could have backed down. They could have claimed the matter was out of their hands and allowed Djokovic to play. But instead, the government sought to save face by noting that Hawke still had personal power to intervene and kick Djokovic out. 3 days later, with the Australian Open draw done and Djokovic in it, the tournament due to begin on Monday, Hawke's inaction is excruciating. This came out a little before his decision that we now know about, canceling the visa for a second time for Djokovic. If he backs down on Friday and allows Djokovic to stay, the government looks weak. As we know, politicians, they like to look like they're doing things about the problems. And of course, they don't want to look like they're ineffective or weak. So I guess that's ultimately why they went this way. The electorate remembers rules don't matter if you're rich and famous, and Morrison's tough on immigration stance is undermined at the worst possible time, right before an election. So why isn't Djokovic on the next plane home? Well, we go to the Bilola family case. Don't know if I'm saying that right. One reason Hawke is reluctant to use his power to personally intervene is the so-called Bilola family case. A Tamil, the true language of India, a Tamil asylum seeker family, the Murugapans, has fought for years to be allowed to return to the town of Bilola in the Australian state of Queensland, mate. After the federal government rejected their claim for asylum on the grounds the parents had traveled to Australia by boat and it ordered them to return to Sri Lanka. Well, this sounds like they got off easy because they didn't have to eat the hot slop and not open their windows in the detention hotel. Prison. The Bilola community has rallied around the family, waging a passionate campaign for Mr. Hawke, the guy who just tore up Djokovic's visa for a second time, to intervene using his personal power to allow the family to return to the town. Thus far, Hawke has largely abstained despite the family's terrible plight. If he doesn't act on Djokovic, well, I'll just read it for you instead of summarizing. The Djokovic case is bringing renewed attention to the Murugapans, and if Hawk chooses to intervene, even if it is to deport the tennis star, he highlights the fact that he could easily do so for these Murugapans. Nice people, I assume. And there's one other major reason Hawk may be hesitating. The Grand Slam, the Australian Open, is Australia's most cherished sporting event. Forget the sentimental feelings. They bring thousands of visitors every year and contribute more than $380 million to the Victorian economy in pre-pandemic 2020. Of course, there was another news story that was out there before any of this happened that I would have told you about, but so many things came up after it. They lost money last year. They lost money with these reduced seeding, tournaments. And so Tennis Australia is kind of hurt to make some money this year. Also, the latest news before all this Djokovic stuff was that they had reduced capacity by 50%, hurting the Australian Open's money again, hurting their pocketbook, you could say, their giant pocketbook. Djokovic is the world's top men's tennis player, a man some fans love and others love to hate. If they lose the headliner at the Australian Open, the competition for the trophy would likely be between Nadal, Medvedev, and Zverev. Definitely less exciting. They also note here that Zverev is being investigated over allegations of domestic abuse. If Zverev is convicted of a domestic violence offense or is subject to domestic violence order, he technically failed a character requirement. Australia's tough, man. For an Australian visa in the future. So maybe Zverev one day will be dealing with all of this, just like Djokovic, over a different issue. More broadly, the Djokovic saga lands at a complex time for the Australian Open. While the Grand Slam is contracted to be held at Melbourne Park in the foreseeable future, Craig Tiley Smiley, tournament's director, has repeatedly warned its future isn't guaranteed, particularly as a result of the pandemic. He said last year, even though we have a contract until 2039 for the government, it doesn't mean that if another country put in a lot of money for a big event that it's easy to play at. Top players would continue to come to Melbourne. Doesn't mean that. The only reason we get players here is because we offer a lot of money and we spend a lot of time pursuing them to come. What happens to a Grand Slam when the world's top player is banned from it for 3 years? Seems Hawk is afraid to find out. I have not seen whether or not that is actually true yet, but I will let you know as soon as I find out. And since I have an important meeting discussing my tennis instruction business, we will be right back, and I'll finish this up audio only. We'll actually, since we're going to do it this way now, I thought I could get through this quick and try to get this video up fast. We'll be right back to go through the last bit where we talk about what is the right thing here and how much does Djokovic deserve blame? How much should we feel pity for him for all this stuff, all this horrible stuff that's going on with him? We'll be right back with that, and of course, we'll look at the draw. Okay, it has been a whole lot of Djokovic stuff. I am back now for my very important meeting. It went very well for Matt's tennis instruction programs, I'll tell you that much. Anyways, let's look at the draw, and then I'll wrap you up on the last of what I have to say about Djokovic. I'm sure we might be doing a video tomorrow or Sunday before there's any tennis happening because so much is going to happen in the next couple days with Djokovic. So it'll be very interesting to see. We'll have lots of chances to talk about it. But let's take a look at the draw. And let's start with Rafa Nadal. Like I said, we're going to do it quick today. We'll get a closer look as the tournament gets rolling. Maybe if we do another video talking about Djokovic in the next couple days, we'll look at the draw then in more detail. But let's take a look at Nadal's seeds that he would run into. First up, Marcus Giron. Okay, so that won't be bad. That's not a bad start. But Tanazi Kokkinakis in the second round or qualifier. Kokkinakis is a guy, remember we saw him in 2018 take out Roger Federer, who had just won the Australian Open in Miami. So he just won the Australian Open 2018. Federer goes to Miami hard court, playing great, obviously, just having won the Australian Open. And Tanazi Kokkinakis took him out there. Then he got hurt. We haven't seen much from Kokkinakis, but every time we see him, he looks really good. I remember when I first saw him, don't know what year it was, but he was pretty young. I think it was the year that Rafa had like an outfit with black and pink, I want to say, or his shoes were pretty cool. I think he had black Nikes with like a hot pink Nike swoosh on it. Whatever year that was, I remember seeing Rafa and a very young Kokkinakis playing there. It must have been around 2013 because I remember seeing Kokkinakis in 2013 at the U.S. Open. That might have been in the junior draw back then. I'm not sure. But anyways, Kokkinakis has always looked good for a long time. He just keeps getting hurt. Well, lately, he's looked very good in Australia, and if he stays healthy and he's Nadal's opponent in the second round, that would be pretty tough. Third round, Karen Khachanov. He's been tough in the past on hard courts, in particular for Rafa. Could be challenging, but Khachanov hasn't looked too great lately, so I would expect Nadal to get through these first 3 rounds. But second round, third round, they're not the easiest. Fourth round, Hurkacz, Karatsev. Karatsev, obviously, he made a name for himself last year at the Australian Open. He's going to have some good memories flood back when he comes here, when he plays at the Australian Open. And that could be tough, but Hurkacz, we know what he did to Roger Federer at Wimbledon, even though it was obviously not a healthy Roger Federer last year. Hurkacz made it to the top 10, had a great year. This is a very fast court this year. The Australian Open looks super fast. Even though Rafa did win playing on that court in the smaller, or whatever it's called, Somerset tournament, Hurkacz could be pretty tricky there with all the firepower. If he is able to come through Hurkacz, he would get Sasha Zverev, who's got a win streak against him on hard courts, or Shapo, who just beat him in that December around Christmas time hard court exhibition that Rafa played in, where he lost to Shapo and Andy Murray. So I don't know, Shapo in a quarterfinal over Rafa, I would probably go with Rafa, especially if Rafa looks good as he works his way through the draw. Sasha Zverev has looked very good in Australia in the ATP Cup. I did mention in the last show that, we saw moments from Sasha Zverev where he got shaky trying to close out sets, matches, but I think it's about time for him. I don't know if I would say he would win here. I think I would favor Medvedev over Sasha in a final. And Medvedev would be playing Sasha Zverev in the final if they were to meet. But that's not a good quarterfinal for Rafa. Would have rather seen him in the semis or the final. Semifinal could be Djokovic. Who knows with everything going on if Djokovic will be there. I went from leaning towards Djokovic is going to be okay to now it's looking like Djokovic won't get to play, which is really a tragedy if you think about it. He could have won it 10 times, right? Djokovic could have set an incredible record this year, winning an Australian Open for the 10th time, I believe. If he won it, would have been his 10th. And now it looks like he might not play there ever again. It really wouldn't shock me. If he gets kicked out of there, if they deport Djokovic, I'd feel pretty comfortable predicting he won't be back to the Australian Open. He might not even want to go there. Every time he goes back there, it's going to be like they ruined that special feeling for him. It's really sad. Whether you agree with him or not, you got to admit that. So Berrettini in a semifinal, obviously I think Rafa could handle him if he makes it. Ollie, does these. We appreciate Ollie. Follow him on Twitter at Ollie_2022. He puts these together. He's a big Rafa fan. You can see from the picture there next to his name. And look what he says at the bottom. Nightmare. Tsitsipas in the final. I don't know. Tsitsipas had an elbow procedure recently. Not the greatest ATP Cup for him. Although towards the end, it looked like he was getting better, I thought. He was hitting some pretty big serves, so maybe the elbow will be fine, but not the best way to prepare whether he's healthy or not. And Medvedev in the final. I think it would be really tough on Rafa to beat Medvedev or Sasha Zverev, but I've learned never bet against Rafa Nadal. Medvedev is my favorite with Djokovic not there. Zverev looks pretty good, but I just don't trust him to get over the hump and actually do it and win the major for the first time if he's up against someone tough like a Medvedev or even a Rafa. It's hard for me to go with Zverev until he does it. I think he can do it, so when he does it, I'll believe in him a lot more, and I'll like Rafa's chances to beat him on a hard court major like this even less. But for now, let's look at Medvedev. He's got Laxon in the first round. Okay, Kyrgios, that could be very interesting, but Kyrgios, who knows where he's at? He didn't even get much of a prep here because he came down with COVID recently. Obviously, he's vaccinated. Another breakthrough case from one of these players. Round 3, Hugo Humbert, who took out Medvedev, but those were very different. That was the first Russian ATP Cup match, I think. And that was, I can't remember which city, but that was the city where it was more humid conditions. And a little rougher on Medvedev, who had been training in much milder weather. Things won't be like that in Melbourne. Yes, it'll be hot, but it won't be quite as humid and draining for Medvedev. So I like his chances here much better against Hugo Humbert. Hugo Humbert is always dangerous, though. I like the guy a lot. We've talked about him a lot on Coffee Break Tennis. John Isner, Maximus Cressius, Diego Schwartz D. Schwartzman. It would be interesting to see Cressy if he made it to fourth round. Think 2017 Misha Zverev, Sasha Zverev's older brother, who's a serve and volley guy. And he did really well. Remember, he took out Andy Murray before Andy Murray had all the hip issues. No one knew about that stuff yet. It was just starting to get pretty bad, I think, then. Or, I guess Murray was still playing pretty well. It wasn't hurting him yet. But later that year, it would finish him off. And, so we remember how he did there. Federer was able to serve and volley right back and take him out pretty easy. But he did really well there. I could see Cressy making the fourth round. I haven't looked closely enough at his portion of the draw to see what he would run into, but that would be an interesting match because of the way Medvedev returns serve. I think Cressy, you might get a situation where we're like in the pressure cooker. Medvedev's holding serve, but he can't break because he's returning way back, and he doesn't play serve and volley guys like Cressy who can really do it well. And Cressy's holding serve pretty easy, and we got some tiebreakers, and maybe Medvedev loses his nerve, loses his temper. It's really when he gets really angry when we see things go bad for him. And even then, he usually wins still, but sometimes he goes too far, and it can hurt him. So that would be interesting, but I still like Medvedev all the way through here. Kyrgios maybe could be tricky, but I doubt it. It's sad to say that because Kyrgios is so promising. You want to see the best from him. He brings high levels of tennis, and that's why we watch. Quarterfinals, Felix Auger all day. I guess Ollie made a mistake here, putting Rublev in both quarter and semi. So I don't know, whichever one. I like Medvedev over Rublev. He beat him in Cincinnati last year. Yes, I don't think he beats him in Australia. Tsitsipas semifinal maybe. I like Medvedev over Tsitsipas here, although that could be close. Felix Auger, you saw he won ATP Cup, but Medvedev spanked him in the singles. No reason to think Felix would beat him. Although I am always constantly reminded that it is tough to beat anyone 2 times back-to-back in a short time frame. In sports in general, like we just saw it in college football here. If you follow college football, the Georgia Bulldogs, they lost to Alabama in a smaller championship, a regional championship type deal. Assuming that you don't know anything about this, you're international maybe listening to this. And then they went to the big game, the national championship, rather than the regional one, and having only played a few weeks earlier, I think, and they won. It's really tough to beat a challenging opponent 2 times in a row. Is Felix Auger all day Aliassime a challenging opponent for Medvedev? I don't know if the rule applies there. Djokovic maybe in the final for Meds. Probably not, the way things are looking right now. Or Rafa or Sasha Zverev. Zverev did beat Medvedev, didn't he? Am I remembering that right? Did he beat him just recently? And let me double check that. Oh, yeah, excuse me, I was wrong. It wasn't ATP Cup. It was obviously, and there you go. Here's the proof. Medvedev beat in the 2021 Nitto ATP Finals, so just last November. Medvedev beat Sasha Zverev in a tough match that ended in a tiebreak. And I think if I remember that correctly, that was the match where he won the first set 6-3. I'm looking at the score. Loses the second set in tiebreak, wins the third in a tiebreak. And I'm pretty sure if I remember this right, Medvedev got way too angry and kind of lost control. Like I was saying, he went a little too far and played a bad tiebreaker in that second set. I think that's how that one went down. And then he recouped and won it in the third set. Very close, obviously. And then he goes down 6-4, 6-4, straight sets in the final. So we see there what I'm talking about. It's hard to beat someone in a short window 2 times in a row. Well, can Zverev do it now? Medvedev had won 5 in a row leading into that match. Can Zverev win 2 in a row at the Australian Open? I would pick, in that final, I would take Medvedev, even after that win in the finals of Nitto Suito ATP Finals. It did play very fast there. It's going to play very fast here, but that's indoor. And this is outside, so we'll see how that changes things. I can't say. I'd love to see that match. They're both playing. They're basically playing like the top 2 players in the world. If you're not on clay, dealing with Nadal, and if you're not dealing with Novak Djokovic on the hard courts. And remember, Djokovic is starting to lose to these guys too. Medvedev and Zverev on hard courts. He won in Paris hard courts, serving and volleying from the baseline. He was looking like Zverev and Medvedev have a little edge on him, but let's see it happen best of 5. And sadly, we probably won't get to see that happen. Okay, that's enough of the draw for now. It's going to be awesome stuff. I hope Djokovic gets to play because we want to see the best players in the world compete for this thing, and it really cheapens the tournament if you take the number 1 guy out who's going for his number 10 title. All right, so this is what I wanted to talk about. I said in the open to the show. We got a little bit here from Tennis 365. Enough is enough. Time to end the circus. Kevin Palmer. Not very friendly to Djokovic in this article, but he makes some good points, so we're going to read it. If Djokovic is not in the Australian Open, he will inevitably leave the country and may never return. And so this is a moment for all sides to draw breath and bring down the curtain on one of the most extraordinary stories in the history of tennis. Well, he gets that part right. As the debate over this divisive subject has raged in recent days, it has been hard to get away from the reality that Djokovic is attempting to play the game by his own rules, at a time when everyone else on the tennis tour has signed up for something different, many doing so reluctantly. And this is the highest IQ tennis show in the world. I swear. And we've got some interesting comments debating this, and these guys made some good points, and I'm going to read that after I finish this article with you. Anyway, so Djokovic attempting to play the game by his own rules at a time when everyone else on the tennis tour signed up for something different, maybe doing so, maybe many players, as I said earlier in the show, doing so reluctantly, as in they didn't want to get the vaccine, but they had to do it for Australia, and Djokovic thought he could beat the system. And that's not debatable, whether you agree with him or not. Djokovic thought he could have his cake and eat it too. We'll get to the comments in a second because that was one of the main comments I'm going to read. When you look at the facts as they have been presented to us in the most extraordinary of sporting dramas, Djokovic is asking the world to join him in a plotline that is increasingly hard to believe. Now, I saw there was some news reports from Serbia saying there's no way he faked his positive COVID test, and it definitely happened, but it is still it's something to debate and wonder. So the positive COVID test result, says Kevin Palmer here, recorded by Djokovic on December 16th, fell at the perfect moment to allow him to compete. Basically, he's saying he doesn't believe it. It came at the perfect moment to allow him to compete, 2 weeks of isolation, and then submit his application for a medical exemption to enter Australia. He presented documents to confirm he tested positive for COVID on December 16th, but social media accounts confirm he attended an event to present awards to children. Think of the children! The next day, and then took part in an interview and photo shoot with French publication L'Equipe a day later. In a statement on Instagram, released in the wee early hours of Mittwoch, Wednesday morning, Djokovic has now confirmed he felt obliged to go ahead and conduct the L'Equipe interview as I didn't want to let the journalist down, despite knowing he was COVID positive. Now, since then, which makes it look worse for Djoker's side of things, that L'Equipe journalist said that Djokovic never notified him that he was COVID positive. And, you would have thought if this was the case that Djokovic would have let him know. That's how I originally read it. I thought, this guy was like, it's cool. You're asymptomatic, but tested. Just social distance and wear your mask. I still want to do this interview. We've been planning on it. But this guy has come out and thrown Djokovic under the bus and said, I was never informed of Djokovic's COVID positive test. So there is that. One strike against Djokovic there, you could argue. He also admitted, Djokovic, that his immigration form had been incorrectly filled out by a member of his own team as they neglected to include the fact he had traveled from his home in Serbia to Spain. Now, this was public knowledge. I think Djokovic himself was posting video of him practicing in Spain. So I think it's fairly believable that Djokovic said it was a mistake, that they ticked the wrong box. Everyone knew he had traveled before coming to Australia to multiple countries. Anyways, continuing, with social media accounts confirming Djokovic was at the Soto Tennis Academy in Cadiz in the first week of January to practice. So why would he lie about that if he knew that everyone else knew that that was the case? That one I don't find as suspicious as many people out there are saying. What happened next has become a story as big as any tennis has ever witnessed, with one of its iconic stars later confirming he attended a lengthy indoor event with a large group of people while knowing he had COVID-19. The secrecy around his trip to Spain seemed curious at the time, but it may now be explained as Djokovic needed to fit the timeline around his positive COVID test in order to get into Australia without too many questions being asked. So he's making the case that Djokovic did this elaborate ruse to get by, and it is somewhat believable. And I would say, even if it is true, I think Djokovic thinks that this is all BS what they're doing anyways. So however he can game their rigged system, right? He thinks what the Australian government is doing is completely unfair to him. He has to go there to defend his title at the Australian Open. He felt justified in doing it. I'm pretty sympathetic to that. I don't know. Honestly, I don't know if I would have had the courage to do what Djokovic did. If I was number one in the world and greatest of all time, maybe I would have thought I could get away with it. But like many tennis players, I probably wouldn't have wanted to do it, the vaccine. As we know, the younger you are, the less threat there is. The healthier you are, the less threat there is. So why take on any risk if you know you're going to be okay? Djokovic had already had the original strain of COVID in 2020. I probably would have just got vaccinated to go to Australia. But if I was going to try to do what Djokovic did, I probably would have felt pretty comfortable doing whatever I had to do to bend the truth a little bit and get in there under their own bogus guidelines as Djokovic sees it and as I would have seen it too. But let's go to some comments, and you comment below and debate what you think. I'm curious. I'm going to go through a lot of comments this weekend and try to find some of the best stuff to talk about next time we get together. This is from ML Tennis 1 on Instagram. Not a fan of Djokovic, but I have more respect for him now because of his vaccine mandate stand. Play or not play, I just want Australia to treat its citizens better. It's been 2 years living under a police state. Give Australians back their freedom. Yeah, we've covered it before. They've actually used the Australian military, not police, the military, to enforce lockdowns. They've had some of the most strict rules. Man, I saw an article in the New York Times recently, though, about what they're doing in China. In one place, they refused to admit a guy, not because he tested positive or anything, but because there was a spike in the area he was coming from. The hospital wouldn't let him in while he was having a heart attack, and he died. That just recently happened in China. So maybe Australia is not the strictest with COVID in the world. Maybe it goes to China and North Korea or something. But they're pretty damn strict, as you know, in Australia. But the Soul Traveler, I think, makes a pretty fair point here, too. He says, I would have had more respect for Novak had he just pulled out and decided not to play because of the vaccine mandate. Unfortunately, he tried to have his cake and eat it, too. And I think that might be how people end up remembering this. That might be how this one goes down in the history book. Djokovic could have made the principled stand by saying, I'm giving up a lot. A real sacrifice for him, right? You could say, oh, he's a multimillionaire, Matt. But still, you know how much it means to him. To greatest of all time is on the line. Forget money. This is, it doesn't matter how much money you could offer. Djokovic wanted to be greatest of all time. His whole family wants it. The whole country of Serbia want it. Fans around the world of Novak's want it. So he was going to do whatever it took, and he was going to make his principled stand both at the same time. I think have your cake and eat it too is really the best way to describe it. But is that wrong? I don't think so. I understand why Djokovic did what he did. Let me finish Soul Traveler's comment here, soul.o.traveler. Personally, I believe he faked a positive COVID test. Looking at everything, it seems like a noble patriot of Serbia doctor maybe helped Djokovic with that. I don't know. No one knows that, but it's believable. I'll put that out there at least. But then he got caught going to events, including with children, while positive, and that's why I think it makes sense that he faked the positive. Either he did it. I think there's a third option too, though. Either he did it because he didn't know, like he said he'd get his test back later. He took the fast tests, which are less accurate, said he was negative, which is possible. If he was asymptomatic, he might not have had very much in his system, but the more thorough test, his paperwork, however, said he got back. It says that he tested positive on that day. He says he saw it the next day on the 17th, I believe. Testing on the 16th. Maybe it says he tested positive on the 16th, but he didn't see the result back. The lab saw it on the 16th. Djokovic saw it on the 17th. After all, he was very important with taking pictures with the kids and doing the interview with Le Quip. Who knows? Gordon Zadzic, maybe a Serbian, he says, and this is important, the World Health Organization, the WHO, advises countries not to make vaccines a requirement, right? They say, the official news report said that they are saying last resort for vaccine mandates. Hit the music, we're going to get out of here. As an absolute last resort. The way to do this, and I agree 100%, and not always with the World Health Organization, as you know, they were covering for China, for the Chinese government. I got to point that out, the Chinese Communist government. They were covering for them in the early days of the pandemic, but I think they were trying to not look so biased and to be in the pockets of Xi Jinping, the leader of the Chinese Communist government. They're trying to look a little more independent now, and they're saying that you need to educate people on the vaccine, not force them. I couldn't agree more. Australia made its choice backed by police, according to Gordon Zadzic. backed by police and military on city squares. If one person who's trying to go around this unwarranted rigidity while making some mistakes too is the main problem in your opinion, let's respectfully conclude that we disagree. All right, we'll be back as soon as I can possibly get a video up when we learn some more about Djokovic. This is an ongoing, developing, breaking news story, as you know. So we'll do our best to get back to that. And of course, we got a lot of tennis to talk about with or without Djokovic, even if it does feel cheapened by taking the top dog out of the tournament. So at the very latest, we'll be back when the Aussie kicks off and talk about all of that. See ya!